Hi, Carla.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent.
Good.
Excellent.
I heard you were able to stop by yesterday.
I was, yes. And Jacob was so helpful. He gave me a full tasting, even though I arrived just minutes before you were closing. It was such a nice surprise. Thank
Oh,
you.
good. Good. That's great. Great. Jacob's terrific. We have a, terrific group of people here. We're very fortunate.
Yeah, it makes such a difference.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was
Good.
that was a really nice experience because I
Good.
hadn't had a chance to visit your winery yet, and
Okay.
yesterday was gorgeous. It was so
Yeah.
beautiful, and the clouds were really pretty, and the vines are so lush. And
Yes. No, it's nice. I mean, one of the nice things about the winery location and the tasting location is that we are right in the middle of the vineyard. So
Mhm.
there's challenges with that, but it creates a nice atmosphere for people to taste. So are you local then?
I am. I live in McMinnville.
Oh, okay, great. Oh, so
Yeah.
do I. I live at our Coast Range Vineyard, which is on Baker Creek Road.
Oh, okay.
We're like 5 miles out on Baker Creek Road. So
Oh, okay. I live just off of Hill and near Baker Creek, and
okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
so
So
pretty
yeah,
close.
you go another 2 miles or 2.5 miles from Hill Road, and you'll right across from Ed Grenfield Park. Um, we have our Coast Range Vineyard, and we built a home at the top of that site. So
Cool.
it's close enough to town, but it's far enough away to be private. So it's nice.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for talking with me today. I know this is a little different than what we typically do. This is nice.
Yeah.
Um, so I'll be asking you a bunch of questions, and I've got the information from last year and your updates.
Okay.
So make sure that I have get those updated. Um, but the most important thing, I wanted to make sure that you know this is being recorded and that any of our conversation or footage could be excerpted for marketing purposes.
Okay. That's fine.
Um, cool. So, how have you been dealing with all of the COVID
Yeah.
stuff? How has that
Yeah.
impacted your business?
Yeah. It's obviously it's an interesting time, I think, for everyone, and certainly interesting time in the wine industry. We made the decision early on before the shutdown here in Oregon that we weren't going to do any layoffs. We weren't going to do any reduction in hours. And so the shutdown was tough. We found things to do in the beginning, and then after 2 months of being closed, you start to run out of closets to clean.
And projects.
Yeah, but the good news is that when the state of Oregon reopened, we were ready to go because everyone was here and everyone was ready, and so the first day we were able to have guests again at the winery. We had 3 cars sitting in our parking lot at 11 o'clock when we opened up, and so we've been open for 6 weeks now, and it's gone really well. Obviously, we've had to make changes.
Mhm.
And created a lot more tasting stations and socially distanced areas for people to taste wine in. But um, it, I am very happy with how well it's gone, how well people um, interact with us, how there's that nice balance of being safe and being thoughtful, and also just enjoying an afternoon in the vineyard, tasting wine. And so, so far, I feel like it's been that nice balance of people taking care of themselves and being thoughtful, and also enjoying a nice glass of wine in a beautiful spot. And so far so good.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's challenges with the wine that we sell to restaurants, with so many restaurants not being open, and hopefully slowly but surely we'll get most of our friends in the restaurant business back open.
Yeah, that's been really tough. That's just
Yeah.
hard to see that.
Yeah, yeah, it is. People that have dedicated so much of their time and energy in their life to creating a wonderful place for people to come and enjoy a meal, and it's just really hard to, especially in a socially distanced environment where you only, let's say you had 10 tables in your restaurant and now you have four. It's hard.
Yeah.
Or so, but hopefully we'll we'll keep moving forward.
Yeah, sure. It's certainly changed how hospitality happens these days.
Yeah, for
Were
sure.
you were you doing any delivery or curbside pickup when you were closed?
We did curbside pickup.
Mhm.
So and so, but yeah, so we had some folks do that. We did a lot more shipping and internet-based sales. That's certain.
Mhm.
I think a lot of wineries saw that happen, where our supporters were very supportive of us and put orders in and bought wine, and so we were, the one thing we were doing a lot of during the shutdown was shipping wine, and that was a good thing, and was really important to kind of keep us going during that really slow phase of being closed to the public.
Mhm. Cool. Um, can you tell me the story of your company, roles of key people, just in a nutshell?
Yeah, so we're small, family owned and operated.
Mhm.
My wife and I started Trisaetum back in 2003. It was just us. We bought the piece of land outside of McMinnville, which we call our Coast Range Vineyard. And it
Mhm.
was just it was an old cattle ranch, had been there for 100 years. It hadn't been used as a cattle ranch for 50 years, but it was just this beautiful hillside that had been cleared at the turn of the century and been being just kind of there. And we planted that vineyard in 2007. We had our first vintage. We were able to get a second piece of land on Ribbon Ridge where we built our winery and where I make all the wines here. We're a
Mhm.
small team, nine total people. We're very fortunate. So many of our team members had been with us from the beginning. The
Wow.
first time we had a tasting room, our tasting room manager is still our tasting room manager today. First time we had a salesperson, that salesperson is still with us today. So we've been very
Mhm.
fortunate that our vineyard workers have been with us for 11 years. Um, so anyway, we've been fortunate. We have a small team, but a really dedicated team. And as I said, it's family business. My parents help out during harvest. My mom cooks all of our harvest meals. My two kids, for whom Trisaetum is named, they sort fruit, or they're now both 21. They were 6 and 4 when we started. So now they can both work in the tasting room and pour wine and greet visitors, and
Mhm.
so it's very much a family affair.
Cool. That's always nice.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
loved all the pictures on the video behind the counter,
yeah,
the bar. It was
yeah.
just so fun to get a sense of the history just by, the images.
Yeah, yeah. I think because I mean that is who we are. I thought it was important to try to share as much of, especially in those beginning years when we were buying land and planting a vineyard and not quite sure if it was going to work or not going to work. But it was, again, even then, a family affair, and kids were a little smaller then, but we got it done.
That's awesome. Will the kids be joining the business, do you think? Do they have any interest? Is that too early to
um,
decide?
yeah, so it's a great question. I hope so. I think so. I think the odds are it's a good lifestyle. They both
Mhm.
enjoy wine. They enjoy what we do. They both worked here for on and off through school and stuff. So um, I suspect that they'll join the business. But it's one of those you never want to rush. Uh, our
Yeah.
son just graduated college. Our daughter is still in college, and so we're very open to them going and working other places and doing other things. But I would not be surprised if they both don't end up back here at Trisaetum.
Yeah, that's nice. Great. What about changes over the last year in management of the vineyard? Or I know that you employ a lot of sustainability practices, and I suspect that you've been doing that for a while. But some of your certifications are new, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. We've actually changed a few things. I mean, we have been farming in a very sustainable fashion from, basically from the beginning. My goal all along was to create a healthy ecosystem, a healthy vineyard that would be there for my grandchildren. I don't have grandchildren.
But you're planning ahead.
I had 2 grade schoolers, but the idea was to have that kind of long horizon, that long-term kind of thinking. But some of the things that we've always been dry farmed. We've never irrigated. We've never used herbicides. We've moved to a completely no-till vineyard, and the Coast Range Vineyard has been that way for 6 or 7 years. The Ribbon Ridge Vineyard, where the winery is located, we've just officially moved 100% there this year.
Okay.
Again, bare soil just transpires water. It's not for me, a living, thriving soil system. And so we've gone to 100% permanent cover, no tilling. And then we recently joined the Deep Roots Coalition, which is a group of like-minded wineries here in the Willamette Valley that don't irrigate and that promote not irrigating. And it's one of the benefits of being in a cool, wet climate. There's a lot of challenges with making wine in the Willamette Valley, but one of the good things about being here is that if you choose to farm without water, without irrigation, you can do it and be successful at it. We also joined 1% for the Planet last year.
I saw that. That's so cool. Not many I don't know many wineries that are part of that.
There's one other, Brooks, I know for sure is Brooks Winery in the Ola Amity. They were there before we were. So Janie likes to let me know that she was first.
That she beat
we
you.
were second. We were second, but it's an organization founded by the founder of Patagonia, that businesses, it could be any business, doesn't have to be in agriculture, but or in the environment, but you donate 1% of all of your revenue to 1% for the planet, or the environmental causes that they support. And what they do is they go out and they have over 2,000 not-for-profit organizations connected to the environment in some way. And it could be food, it could be wildlife, it could be forest. I mean, so something environmental, and then you pair up with them and you actually take that 1% of revenue and donate it directly to those organizations. So we've partnered with 2 to start. One is an organization called Bee Girl.
Okay.
It's an organization based down in Ashland, Oregon. And they had first started a project with Irvine and Roberts Winery down in Ashland to create a bee-friendly vineyard, because unfortunately vineyards are not particularly bee-friendly. You take away all the flowers and you put grapevines in, and if you till up your soil, you're really taking away all the flowers, and then you're spraying every 10 days sulfur or something, which is not particularly conducive to the bees. And so I wanted to start a research project with her up here in the Willamette Valley. And so we've done a 5-year grant where we've created a 5-year grant for this organization. And part of our goal of going no-till is that we are promoting the growth of as many flowers and flora in our vineyard as possible, not just around the vineyard, but actually inside, underneath the vines, in the rows. And so we're studying over the course of the next 5 years, both the flower population in the vineyard and the bee population in the vineyards. And we know, like the very first time, our very first measurement, we know we have 5 different species of native bees in the vineyard, but a really healthy, flourishing ecosystem would have 25 or 30 different species of bees. And so we're hopeful over the next 5 years we can go from 5 species of bees, which is maybe 5 more than some vineyards have.
Yeah.
So but to go from 5 to 25 or 30 different, because I think not only is it good for the bee population, which is endangered, but it's an indication of how you're farming. Because if bees can thrive in your vineyard, you're not doing things. You're not mowing or tilling all of your flowers away. You're not spraying herbicides to kill your vegetation. You're not spraying chemicals in your vineyard that would kill your insects and kill your bees. And so part of it is it's the right thing to do, and the second part is I actually think it's a great indicator of a healthy and vibrant ecosystem. I also believe, because we do all of our fermentations with native yeast, the yeast have to get on the grape clusters somehow, and they need flying, flittering things to pick up yeast along the way from soil or bark or wherever, and deposit it on the grape clusters. And so if you don't have a lot of flying, flittering, buzzing things in your vineyard, you may not have a true sense of that place, because you're not getting the true yeast population. So anyway, so that's one of our new projects this year, and it'll happen over the next 5 years. So I'm really excited about that.
Wow, that's very cool.
Yeah, and then we also partnered with the Oregon Oak Accord.
Okay, yeah.
The Oak Accord started by Pat Dudley, Mimi Castile, and some like-minded vintners here and viticulturalists here in Oregon, where the Oregon white oak population is down to about 2%, I believe, of what it used to be, because of so much clear cutting, putting vineyards in, building homes and turning savannas into grassland. And so and there's about 200 species of that depend on the Oregon white oak for their survival. And so we've got a project in both our Coast Range and our Ribbon Ridge vineyard, working with the Oregon Oak Accord to actually kind of rehabilitate some areas where the fir trees in Oregon just grow faster than these 200-year-old white oaks, and they're beautiful, grand trees, but they get the firs grow so fast they just block them out. And so we're actually taking a couple of areas where we have some really beautiful oak populations, but they're getting choked out by other plants and these big Douglas fir trees, and we're going to kind of rehabilitate that and clear some areas so that hopefully both vineyards can have these oak savannas, these oak woodlands, that maybe if we didn't do anything in 20 or 30 years, they'd be gone. And so anyway, so those are a couple, both of those are not maybe directly linked to how we're farming Pinot Noir grapes, but I do think they're linked to a holistic view of the ecosystem and trying to create a healthy and vibrant and sustainable ecosystem, and not just, I don't want to create a monoculture. Yes, we farm grapes, and yes, we have a vineyard, but if that's all we do, if all we care about is the vineyard, I think ultimately we hurt the environment, and we actually end up hurting our wine. I think the wines become less interesting, less complex. And so I think for us, that biodiversity is a really important part of what we do.
Cool. Well, and I think that what you're saying is that it permeates that attitude and philosophy towards your land and how you're treating it and farming it. It isn't separate from growing grapes and making wine. It's so connected.
I think so. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you answered the sustainability question. What about your vineyard management company? Are you working with an outside company to do that?
We work with a small vineyard management company, Jorge Chavez and Chavez Craft Vineyards. We've worked with Jorge for 11 years. This is our 11th vintage. 2009, I think, was our first vintage, which is great. So he's a small family-owned and operated, family-run business like we are. He's part of our Trisaetum family, and some of his team are the exact same team that he had in 2009. So we're really fortunate that the folks working in our vineyard, I ultimately take accountability for what we're doing, what our programs would be in terms of spraying or viticultural work, but his organization is the one that executes all of that. But we have some of the exact same individuals that were working our vineyards in 2009 are still working them today in 2020. And I think that's a huge benefit because they understand the sites, they understand the vines, they understand this block versus that block. And so
the history.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And so we've been very fortunate in that we have great longevity with our viticultural workers as well.
That's great. And how does that translate, do you think, into the wine growing, the quality of the wine?
I think it's critical. It's the most important thing. At the end of the day, there's nothing I can do as a winemaker that can make up for poor work in the vineyard. And if you take care of your site, you take care of your fruit, that's 80%. Most of it at that point, I can just mess up as a winemaker. And so the work that they do and that we do in the vineyard is by and far the most important thing that we do as a winery. And we're all estate fruit, so we only make wine from we have 3 vineyards, 2 that I planted myself, that's Ribbon Ridge and Coast Range, and then we have a third vineyard called Wickman Dundee, and all of our wines come from those 3 sites.
Okay, nice.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of your winemaking style, how would you define that in terms of, experimental versus, each vintage is distinct versus it's similar from year to year. What would you say?
Okay. Yeah. By nature, I tend to be a tinkerer and experimenter. So we do try every year kind of some just new and innovative, interesting things. The reality, though, is that if we do the right things in the vineyard and we grow the fruit the right way, most of what I have to do is just, if I pick it at the right time, you just kind of have to trust that Mother Nature is giving you everything you need, and there's nothing else you need. So just like in the vineyard, I don't like to add anything in the vineyard. I want to, other than the compost pile that we get from our grape skins and pumice from the year before, that goes back in the vineyard. But other than that, we try not to add very much in the vineyard. When it gets to the fruit comes in the winery, my goal is to add as little as possible. So indigenous yeast, the yeast that come on the grape clusters. We use tiny bits of sulfur, and in some fermentations we won't even see any sulfur until 3 or 4 months later when it's all the way through malolactic fermentation. We don't use any additives. We don't use any enzymes. We don't use any tannins. I'm not trying to make the same wine each year. I think one of the great things about being in Oregon and being in the Willamette Valley is there is great vintage variation.
Yeah.
And that can be a nightmare some vintages because it's cool one year, it's wet the next, it's hot, dry the next. And so there's challenges because we do have a very, our climate here and our macro climate changes year after year. But I think if you embrace that, I think it's more interesting that your wines are much more reflective of the vintage and not necessarily of what of a particular style that you try to make year in and year out. So, there are certain things I do that I like wines with maybe a little less alcohol. I tend to pick a little earlier. I like brighter, livelier wines. I like wines, Pinot Noir that's made with a lot of whole clusters. So those are personal choices. And so I do have an impact as a winemaker on the wines, but again, the less impact that I can have, usually the more interesting and complex the wines are. When I start if I wanted to start adding a bunch of enzymes or tannins or a lot of new oak or things that basically take away a sense of place, because they're basically making it more generic, consistent, but more generic. And I would much rather have the variability and the interest level being higher. And so anyway, that's it's kind of the way we farm, and it's kind of the way we make wine.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, why don't you tell me about the 3 wines that you've selected? I'm not going to be tasting with you because I will just get distracted. So I would rather take notes and go ahead and taste later. But
Okay.
take me through why you selected these wines. I know the 2 Pinots are the more recent vintage of what you had last time.
Yeah.
And the Riesling is a different Riesling than what you got the slow wine.
Yeah, I think it was supposed to be the same, and I think it ended up being a different one. I think I told so anyway, but it's great. I make 9 different Rieslings, and they're all unique.
I mean, we can.
So let's start with the 2. We'll start with the 2 Pinots, and
okay.
I happen to have them here, so I can show them to you.
Yeah.
So basically, the 2 Pinots are single vineyard. So a lot of what I do are single vineyard Pinot Noirs, just because I have the 3 sites, and I think they're so different. Even though I farm them the same way and pick them at the same levels and I ferment them the same way, they're so completely different wine. And so the Ribbon Ridge. So yeah, last year you guys tasted the 16s of Ribbon Ridge and Coast Range. Ribbon Ridge is the vineyard that's at the winery. Mm-hmm. Very sandy soils, all sedimentary, some of the most pure ocean-based marine sediments in the Willamette Valley. The Willamette Valley has a lot of volcanic soil that shows up all over the place. But on Ribbon Ridge, this little tiny island, there's just no volcanic soil. It's all sedimentary. It drains very fast. It's a warmer site. And so the hallmark of Ribbon Ridge, whether it's my wine or my neighbor's wine, I think is the spice component you get from the Pinot Noir. And I think this 2017 is right in line with that. There's this kind of nutmeg, clove, baking spice character. It's not coming from barrels. This particular wine is only 15% new wood. So it has almost no new barrels in it. But when you taste it, I think you're going to find a wine that has just a lot of spice, mm-hmm. And a lot of expressiveness. The vineyard, this particular vineyard tends to be a little darker fruited. I tasted this wine before we got on the call, and I find it to be a little bit more red fruited for whatever reason in 17. So there's a pleasing core of fruit, which is very consistent with what Ribbon Ridge gives. The classic spice. There's a lot of power to this wine, and it's only 13.1% alcohol, which I love. I love, again, I tend to pick a little earlier. I like wines that are maybe a little lighter on their feet and a little bit more elegant and nuanced versus maybe a little bit more hedonistic. But I still think it makes a terrific impression on the palate. Even though it's only clocking in at 13.1% alcohol. When you compare it to the Coast Range, this is my home site. It's the first vineyard I planted. This is a cooler site. It's a higher elevation. It's a windier site. Whenever I start picking Ribbon Ridge, I usually don't pick the Coast Range for about 2 weeks, but sometimes 3 weeks after. And they're only 10 miles apart as the crow flies, but they're kind of worlds apart in terms of vineyards. The Coast Range is much more volcanic soil. Mm-hmm. There is some sedimentary, but it's much more volcanic basalts. And so, but it's also a wilder site. When you come to Ribbon Ridge by the winery, there's lots of other vineyards here. At the Coast Range, there's nothing else except for wildness, deers and bobcats and, mm-hmm. and all kinds of stuff. That site has not been tilled for 5 or 6 years. It's very wild. There's lots of blackberry bushes. There's tons of flora. And so I think not unexpectedly, I think this wine is earthier. I think it's a little bit more wild. It's got, it's actually a little darker fruited. Sometimes they're just the opposite, where Ribbon Ridge is darker and Coast Range is more red fruited, but I find them to be the opposite this year, where the Coast Range is a little darker fruited, and it's got, they both have good core fruit, but the fruit's not necessarily the star. And I like that. I like wines that are showing a sense of place and either minerality or earthiness or spiciness. So where the Ribbon Ridge is, I think, is really showing the spiciness. The Coast Range for me in this vintage, like many vintages, is showing much more earthy components, some mineral components, some stoniness to it that I really like. It's a 13.4% alcohol. That's 2007. A lot of times Ribbon Ridge is actually the higher alcohol wine because it's the warmer site, but in a warm, dry vintage like 2017, you're just able to leave the fruit hanging as long as you want at the Coast Range because it's a cooler site, and so you get these really beautiful long hang times, and so you tend to get a little bit more ripeness. So 13.4. I'm still very, I'm perfectly happy with Pinot Noirs at 13.5%. I think they're great, especially when they're in balance. I think the pH on both these wines are under 3.6, so they're lively and bright, and so. But I think when you get a chance to taste them, hopefully what you'll find is that there's some sense of the same winemaker because there's some whole cluster in both of them. There's some destemmed fruit in both of them. But hopefully you're going to find two very different Pinot Noirs because they come from two different places. Even though I put the same plants in, I farm them the same way, pick them the same way, ferment them the same way, same barrel treatment. Nothing is different in terms of percent of full cluster or percent of new wood or anything else. So any difference you taste in the wines is very much the place hopefully showing through. So
Nice.
those are the two Pinots. Any questions about the two Pinot Noirs?
No.
Okay, great.
Looking forward to tasting them.
Third wine is our Wickman Dundee Riesling. So this is our third vineyard. So I'm glad that you have a chance to taste all three sites.
Mm-hmm.
I do 9 different Rieslings a year, which is 8 more than everyone else.
And why? I'm curious. Why Riesling?
Why 9 of them?
Yeah.
Well, my family, my father's side, my mom's British and came to America when she was 18. My father's family is French and from Alsace, and so even though I didn't grow up with wine on my dinner table, I have a feeling that there's a Riesling in my DNA somewhere because the first wine I fell in love with was Riesling, and it's still my favorite white wine. I love Riesling. I love all styles of Riesling: dry, off dry, dessert Rieslings. And so we do 9, and we do about 60% of our wines, 65% are dry, and they're very dry. And then about 30% are what I would call more of a medium dry style, where there is some residual sweetness, like in this wine. And then we also do a dessert, a late harvest, botrytized Riesling as well. So this vineyard, I didn't plant. We acquired it, but the top of the vineyard was all Pinot Gris when we acquired it. And nothing against Pinot Gris. I don't make Pinot Gris. And I wanted to make Riesling. And so we grafted over the Pinot Gris with Riesling back in 2011. And ever since that's happened, this site has produced some of the most spectacular Rieslings that I get a chance to make. It's very distinct in that it doesn't matter what the vintage is. This site, these are all 100% volcanic soils, classic Dundee Hills, red Jory soils. Finer soils, good water holding capacity. This site takes forever to ripen, 700 feet of elevation. There's some shade on the Riesling block. So this is always one of my last picks of the year. It's the one that we're kind of waiting for. but the Rieslings have such an amazing floral quality to them. And then I think this one does. Jasmine, honeysuckle, white flowers. It's just this whole meadow full of flowers. And this site also tends to produce a lot of, and from the fruit spectrum, fresh peach, nectarines. I think this particular vintage shows that as well. This wine always has great acidity. It's a cooler site, so the pHs are always under 3.0. So this one's 2.95. So that's got a lot of energy to it. But it's got roughly 4% RS, 4% residual sweetness. And so that balance of those fresh fruit, peach, nectarine flavors, the floral flavors with that great electric acidity, I think it's fun. And I love the site on dry Rieslings too. And I think that's probably the one we had last year was maybe, I don't know. Now I have to go back and look at what we had, but it doesn't matter. I think all the Rieslings are interesting and unique in their own. And so this one is an off-dry style, 2019. So last year's vintage, which was a little bit of a challenging vintage in the Willamette Valley, cooler, definitely wet. So this Riesling had to hang through some rains, but I think it's got great concentration of flavor. When I farm Riesling, I don't pull any leaves. I keep the fruit very covered. That runs some risk of botrytis or mildew. But on the flip side, I like the phenolic character I get when I don't expose the clusters to sunlight. And on a rainy vintage, the leaves basically protect the clusters from getting wet. And since this fruit hangs so late in the year, you're
always in rain.
Right.
Harvest.
And so not having the clusters fill up with water, because at that point in time, any dilution is coming from rain or water getting absorbed through the skin. It's not coming up through the root system. And so if your clusters are covered and protected from the rain, you tend to see less dilution in those rainy vintages at the end. And so that's kind of and so even though it was a rainy vintage last year, I think there's still nice core energy. This particular Riesling clocks in at 9.3% alcohol. So it's one of the lower alcohols, but because it's got 4% residual sweetness. The dry style from this same vineyard would be somewhere in 12.5 to upwards of 13.0% alcohol. And that's pretty typical because those Rieslings I ferment all the way to dry. There's no RS, maybe 0.1%, 0.2%. But when I leave 4%, you're obviously leaving some of that alcohol potential in the wine as sugar. So.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds good. Yesterday when I came in, he poured me 2 Rieslings side by side, and one was the Wickman next to the other one.
Yeah.
And it was so interesting because the nose was so distinctly different. The Wickman was so floral compared to the other. But I found that the flavor profile of each of those on the palate was very similar.
Really? Okay.
At least that's what I noticed. But it was so distinct on the nose that, it was like, wow.
Yeah. No, that's one of the great things about Riesling is a great Riesling does a great job of taking what's in the site and in the soil and putting it in the glass. And I think one of what's great about Alsace in Germany is that they make single vineyard Rieslings, and you can do that. In the United States, so many producers that make Riesling, they make one Riesling, and they might be combining multiple sites together. And so you never get a chance to experience the fact that just like with Pinot Noir, you can take the same winemaker from 2 different vineyards, and you get and if they treat the fruit the same way, you get 2 completely different wines. And if you had the opportunity to taste all 9 Rieslings all side by side, you would find differences in all of them. And I think I think it's exciting. Certainly in younger wines, the aromatics are markedly different. As the wine ages, I tend to find that the palates also tend to get farther and farther away with time. So anyway, that's exciting. Good. I'm glad that when you were here, you were able to get a chance to taste a couple of Rieslings side by side.
Yeah, that was really fun. It was surprising because Riesling, there's not that much Riesling here in the Valley, so there's not that many opportunities to try more than one Riesling at a time.
Yeah, exactly. So, good.
Great. Okay, so what qualities do you want your wine to have?
That's a good question. Wines have to be balanced, first of all, right? So whatever you think as a winemaker, it balances. So for me, it's that balance between fruit and earth and acid and tannin, and that they're just, nothing is sticking out. It all works together. So that's just kind of a baseline. But beyond that, I want the wines to be interesting, and I want them to reflect a sense of place. And so if all my wines tasted the same and they tasted the same year in and year out, then it's not very interesting to me. So for me, interesting wines that that make you pause a little bit and want to spend some time with it and think about it, because there's something like the Whitman, right? It's so floral. I want that. And my other Rieslings are floral. There's sometimes you get a little bit of white flower in the Coast Range, but not nearly the same as what you get in Whitman. So for me, that's what's exciting. I love opening up a bottle of Whitman Riesling, whether it's the dry or the off dry, and I know I'm going to get just a nose full of flowers, and I like that. So I want the wines to be unique and interesting, different from one another, and I want people to take notice that there's a lot of great wines being made in the Willamette Valley. But what's great about the Willamette Valley is not all of our wines don't taste the same. And if they all tasted the same, it would be really boring. And so I think I love all kinds of wines, and I want my wines to be unique and interesting and to be different. And that's kind of the goal. And if you respect your vineyard and you respect what Mother Nature is different here, right? From the soils, the microclimates, you can get very different and interesting wines. It's only when you start trying to manipulate the wines into a predefined and predetermined package of flavors and aromas and character, then I think that's when they get less interesting.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then could you talk just a little bit about the artist series that you have? I noticed that there was a big display on the wall, and I didn't have a chance to ask about that. So I'm kind of curious.
So in addition to being winemaker and running the winery here, I'm a big painter. And our tasting room has a 1,500 square foot art gallery, and I take the down season when the vines go dormant. So basically November, December, January, February, March, that kind of 4 to 5 month period. And I kind of disappear. I'll come in maybe 2 days out of the week, and then 5 days out of the week I paint. We have paintings now around the world. I have paintings hanging in Sweden and France and Great Britain and China, and then I think 35 different states in the US, which is great. We get a lot of different people that come and visit us. And so when I started Trisaetum, I decided I wanted to do an artist series Pinot Noir each year that was single block, single clone, because we have these 30 blocks of Pinot between the 3 vineyards. So I've got, Curry clone planted on Ribbon Ridge. I have some, I have Pomard on all 3 sites. So every year I take a single block that I think is interesting and unique on its own. I don't, I take 4 barrels from that block and put it together and bottle it as a single clone, single site, single block. And then I put one of my paintings on the label. And it's a painting that I've done that year. So I do 4 of these a year. And they're all numbered sequentially. They are only available at the winery. They're basically go to our club members. And I'm about to bottle Artist Series 50. So I've done 1 through 50. They're all numbered sequentially because I'm doing 4 a year. My goal is to get to Artist Series 100, which is the 2032 vintage. And that's when I'm done. So what's cool, but yeah, so we just did that display. We've got artist series 1 through 46 up on the wall,
Mhm.
the bottles, and then we just chose the 4 paintings, and we just chose the 4 wines that are going to become artist series 47, 48, 49, and artist series number 50. And it's fun. It's neat because you can really taste when you get down to tasting whole cluster Pommard from Coast Range versus destemmed Pommard from Ribbon Ridge versus Dijon 115 from, I mean, when you get that really small micro block specific, the wines are so different. And in fact, I'm unveiling the 4 wines for my team tomorrow. So tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, we have a tasting, and
Nice.
I'm officially unveiling the 4 new artist series and the 4 paintings that were selected for the label. So that's what our artist series is. It's fun. And it's going to keep me making wine and making art at least until 2032, and then we'll see what happens.
That's awesome. I just think it's so remarkable that you came here to plant a vineyard and you've been able to create this life for yourself and your family that just sounds like it's so much fun, combining the things that you're really passionate about.
Yeah, I try to instill that in my kids, that if you do something you love, then you never work a day in your life.
Yeah.
And if we knew all of the challenges and all of the ups and downs that you would have before we started, we probably would have never, taken the plunge. But I'm really glad we did, because it's every day I'm making wine or I'm making art, and that's for me, it's the stuff I love to do, and so it's pretty special that I get to do that. And I wouldn't trade what I get to do for anything. So
Well, and you're doing it in such a beautiful place.
yeah, no, exactly. My wife and I, we did internships in college in Oregon before we started dating, and we both fell in love with Oregon. We both knew that we wanted to raise our family. So when we first started dating, it was one of the immediate things that we had in common was that we were in Arizona at the time, so we were not very close to Oregon. But we both wanted to raise families in Oregon, and so as soon as we got married, we had our children. It was how do we combine this desire to start a winery with the desire to raise a family in Oregon, and so we've been able to put those 2 things together, and pretty fortunate that we were able to do that. So it's a great people and just beautiful area to live in.
That's so cool. I find from talking to people that there's a really special group of people that, ended up here in Oregon to make wine. It wasn't just they wanted to make wine, it could be anywhere. So they wanted to make wine here.
Yeah.
And I think that's just really special.
Yeah, Oregon definitely attracts a certain, you have to be a little entrepreneurial, because especially up until just recently, it wasn't an established wine region. Now it's much more established today than it was 20 years ago, or definitely 40 years ago. It was very pioneering, 30 or 40 years ago. And then, and it's not consistent. There's a lot of variation and vintage variation, and you have to be willing to take a few risks. And so it does kind of pull together these like-minded entrepreneurial folks that also love cool viticultural wines, right? So Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Riesling, things that grow really well here. But again, it's you have to be willing to roll up your sleeves and try to make it work, because it can be a very challenging place to grow grapes, especially if you do it sustainably and organically, and you're not able to spray anything you want to try to prevent mildew or botrytis or other things. You have to be on your game, and you have to be thinking about what you're doing in the vineyard. But when you do, it makes amazing. I'm completely biased, but I think it makes amazing wine.
Excellent. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add for the record?
No, I hope I covered it all.
I think you did. I've got like 4 pages of notes. And
all right, so hopefully I didn't talk too long. That's usually the problem with me, is that you can't get me to stop talking. So
no, this was great. It was so informative. Thank you so much for your time today. I will go ahead and make the updates and write the tasting notes. And if you're interested in having the wine, the Riesling that you had last year, I'm happy to stop by and pick that up if you would prefer to list that one instead of this one.
No, I'm perfectly okay with this. I mean, I love them all. They're all
Okay.
equally my children. I love them all. And so,
Well, that's
yeah, no,
important.
no, I think it's a great bottle, and I think representative of the at least the medium dry Rieslings that I make. And I'm glad you get a chance to taste the Wickman Vineyard in addition to Coast Range and Ribbon Ridge. So.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Thank you for your time today. It was wonderful of learning more about the winery, your philosophy, the wines, all of that. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Carla. It was a pleasure talking to you.
I'll see you later.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye.